have been leaving the cities for the country, but actually it's the water we should be heading to, which I guess as an island nation, maybe it shouldn't surprise us. But what did you make of that?
I'm blessed. We have in Devonport, we got five beaches I can walk to in a couple of minutes, and that's my running track.
Right.
You know, that's what I do. I go right along the peninsula and up to Takapuna Beach and run along that one, and I am by the water for much of the run, and that is really doing me good. Likewise.
Physically, mentally, what?
Well, both.
Yeah.
You know, getting the exercise, but also the sense of it, of looking at it, that there's something that's heartening about it. But also in my day, that day I was just describing that is so elastic and unpredictable, I'll very often, especially if I'm trying to get something clear in my head for writing, I'll walk down to the village and get a coffee and sit on a bench in Windsor Reserve and look at the water there, and it's brilliant.
Does the water do it for you, Nikki?
Oh, absolutely. This doesn't surprise me at all.
No.
I just think it's so restorative. And don't you think we Kiwis have an affinity with the water?
I think we do.
I always feel like, especially living in Auckland, you can just about see the water almost all the time, right? No matter where you are, or you're very close to it. And it's just something that I really miss when I'm in inland places. Find it very difficult and very disconcerting not to be able to either see the water or know where it is.
It's calming.
Totally, yeah, and you know, you think about how you feel after you've had an ocean swim. It's just so good. You just feel amazing. There's definitely something about the ocean in particular. I think that's really, really restorative for mind and body.
It is our instinct to pull it, throw off the jandals, walk in the sand into the water.
Yeah, I was at Mission Bay yesterday with my whano, and you know, there were hundreds, maybe thousands of people there at Mission Bay, and not necessarily in the water, but near the water. Kids playing in the fountain. It was just this really festive atmosphere of happiness.
Is this you know, evolution-wise, is this our fish part of ourselves still calling to it?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
Do you think it's a chemical? I mean, we don't know. We're not scientists,
too.
But
you know, you're in the womb, and the thud, the sort of wave rhythmic thud.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We're made up of water,
there is sound. There is a sound element to it, isn't it? It's an oral thing.
Yeah.
But there's also, as you say, the freshness of the air and the beauty of it all.
Yeah. All of those things.
And the space. There's room. You know, you are uninhibited. No, you're unencumbered.
Unencumbered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just quickly before we go, the Joker movie has met with critical acclaim globally. One of the movie's most memorable scenes was on some stairs, and people are turning up on these stairs and taking their photos. It's in the Bronx. It's 2 apartment buildings in the Bronx. There's some stairs up there. People are turning up. What is it about going to these places you see in the movies?
This won't stop until Instagram explodes. I think that's the answer.
It's an Instagram drama.
But I've got to say, even before social media, we were on a holiday in New Orleans a couple of years after the movie Angel Heart was released. That's the one with Mickey Rourke and just a pulsating bayou piece of devilry.
Why did you want to go and be in the place you saw in the movie?
Because there was something really exotic maybe about those huts in the bayou, and so a guy who'd take you in a van to see them.
Yeah,
hell yeah, I'm going.
Nikki, would you go to these things?
I have been to the Dakota Building in New York on a special trip in the 90s, pre-Instagram, just to see where John Lennon lived and was.
That's a moment rather than a movie, which seems different.
Sex and the City tours. I haven't done that, but you know, you think about that is still a thing in New York.
Still a thing.
Locations, yeah.
Nikki Bazant, David Slack, who joined us on the panel today. I'm Tim Watkins and for Wallace Chapman, who is back tomorrow in fine fettle. But right now we're coming up to 5 o'clock and we're handing over to Lisa Owen.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi a Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. On tonight's programme, the trial of the man accused of murdering the British backpacker Grace Millane gets underway in Auckland, plus the Dunedin trial of a former doctor accused of killing a 16-year-old girl. The acting Prime Minister takes the witness stand in his privacy case against opposition MPs and the Crown. The grisly footage has emerged of the slaughter of Australian racehorses. Has the industry turned a blind eye to it, and will it affect tomorrow's Melbourne Cup? Christchurch nurses say a lack of staffed car parks is causing them danger. And would you use sheep placenta cream? Apparently, it's $1 million industry. The Thai PM is keen on it. Jacinda Ardern hadn't heard of it. We'll go live to Bangkok after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The lawyer acting for a former Dunedin doctor on trial for the murder of a teenage girl says his client is innocent and never threatened anyone. Bernard Scanther is charged with murdering 16-year-old Amber Rose Rush in her Corstorphine home in Dunedin last February. He's also facing charges of threatening to kill 4 others. The Crown says Mr Scanther killed the teenager to stop her coming forward with claims that would have cost him his job as a doctor at Dunedin Hospital. But defence lawyer Jonathan Eaton QC says it wasn't Mr Scanther who attacked the victim.
The defence do not dispute that Amber Rush was killed in her own room by a fatal blow, a fatal wound inflicted by an intruder who knew how to get into the house in the dark of night, an intruder who knew where her bedroom was. That intruder was not Bernard Scanther.
Jonathan Eaton, QC. Winston Peters says he finds it repugnant that ministry officials informed his political opponents about his pension overpayment. Mr Peters has been giving evidence on the first day of his privacy case against former National Party ministers, top civil servants and a government department. The New Zealand First Leader told the High Court in Auckland that his privacy was breached in the lead-up to the 2017 election.
I find it repugnant, and I believe any New Zealander would equally find it repugnant if their private dealings with MSD were released to ministers who have no responsibility in the issue. In my case, ministers who are my political opponents a month out from a general election.
Winston Peters says the ministers should never have been notified as it was a clerical error by ministry staff. A lawyer who represents a number of survivors of institutional abuse has spoken of an ongoing culture of violence at welfare homes and psychiatric hospitals. Sonia Cooper has told a Royal Commission the most common complaints in psychiatric hospitals were severe physical assaults at the hands of staff and other patients, and sexual violation and abuse. She says one former patient talked about being given painful injections as a punishment.
One particularly painful injection was paraldehyde, which was so poisonous that it actually had to be administered through a glass needle that was very thick. And again, a lot of clients were given that regularly to punish them.
Sonia Cooper says complaints not dealt with properly have exposed vulnerable children to further abuse. The trial of the man accused of murdering British backpacker Grace Millane has begun. Ms Millane went missing on the eve of her 22nd birthday in December last year while she was in New Zealand on her OE. Sarah Robson has been at the High Court in Auckland.
Ms Millane's body was found buried in the Waitakere Ranges shortly after a 27-year-old man was charged with her murder. This morning, a jury of 7 women and 5 men was selected for his 4-week trial. Justice Moore told the jury it had to set aside intense media coverage of Ms Millane's disappearance in deciding the facts of the case. The Crown will open its case on Wednesday morning and intends to call about 40 witnesses, including Ms Millane's father, David. Ko Sarah Robson, Aho.
Local councils can now set fishing regulations after a watershed court decision today. The Court of Appeal decided the Bay of Plenty Regional Council can impose restrictions around Motiti Island for biodiversity reasons. Fishing industry representatives challenged this, saying it would be impossible to plan their operations if restrictions were managed locally. But after a long legal battle, the Court of Appeal has sided with the council, subject to limitations. Forest and bird lawyer Peter Anderson says marine degradation is largely due to overfishing.
It looks like we'll get some provisions which stop fishing in those really valuable areas to protect the marine ecosystems.
Peter Anderson from Forest and Bird. And in news just to hand, New Zealand and China have struck a deal on the long-awaited upgrade to their free trade deal. It includes new rules to make exporting to China cheaper and easier and give preferential access to the wood and paper trade over the next 10 years. Tens of thousands of people on expiring provisional licences are getting a reprieve. Presently, those on their learner and restricted have 5 years to move on to the next licence stage or pass another theory test to get a renewal. In an announcement today, more than 144,000 drivers are to get a 2-year extension. Associate Transport Minister Julianne Genter says the reprieve gives drivers more time to get their full licence or save up to pay for the test. Fire crews have contained a blaze from spreading near near Cromwell in central Otago. 6 fire crews and 2 helicopters continue to fight active hotspots at Cornish Point, near Cromwell. The fire burnt up to 8 hectares of land. A 3-day total fire ban was declared in central Otago on Saturday, and it's hoped to lift it tomorrow. It's coming up to 5:05. The Springboks will take the Rugby World Cup on tour of South Africa this week. They will begin on Wednesday when they return from Japan, starting in Pretoria and finishing in Cape Town. Springboks flanker Pieter-Steph du Toit says he doesn't know what to expect.
When we go back home, it's going to be an unbelievable experience, and I think we just can't wait to get back home and see how everyone is there. And I think we miss our country so much at the moment. It's going to be a nice feeling to get there.
Du Toit was named the Men's Player of the Year at the Rugby Awards, with the Springboks taking out Team of the Year. Meanwhile, members of the third-placed All Blacks arrive back in Auckland tomorrow. World Rugby's 2017 Women's Player of the Year is back in the Black Ferns Sevens team for the first time in a year. Portia Woodman has been out after rupturing her Achilles tendon, but has been named in the New Zealand squad for this week's Oceania Sevens in Fiji. In football, the coach who brought All Whites midfielder Sarpreet Singh to Bayern Munich has been sacked. The German champions have parted company with Niko Kovac a day after a 5-1 thrashing away to Eintracht Frankfurt. Singh has yet to make an appearance. In American basketball, the Miami Heat scored a franchise record 46 points in the first quarter, trouncing the Houston Rockets 129-100 in Miami. Their 5-win, 1-loss start is their best since they won an NBA title 7 years ago. That's the news.
Levin's elderly fearful after a 90-year-old's assaulted at home.
They have always been taught right from Little East 90 years ago to look after your neighbour. Well, sadly, the neighbour isn't the one we would hope was living in our society.
Summer heat hits early.
We're going to see lower 30s again today, so it'll feel like summer, but problem is we're barely at the first week of November.
And Trump's typos are counted.
Since joining Twitter, Trump has made 358 of those spelling mistakes. Barack Obama, 4.
There's one we can't forget, though.
Oh, of course, Kofifi.
Local and international Kofifi. Morning report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, could the antitrust investigation into Facebook by 47 US states put a stop to its aggressive behaviour and even rewrite competition law? And after 10, the good, the bad and the ugly of New Zealand business decisions with leadership scholar Ralph Bathurst. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For the North Island, mainly fine and warm with cloudy areas about western regions tonight. Isolated showers about Gisborne and Hawke's Bay ranges and patchy drizzle from Manawatu to Wellington tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine, high cloud developing tomorrow morning and a shower or two about Canterbury tomorrow night. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing, patchy drizzle about Fiordland, gradually spreading to Bulla tomorrow morning, while turning to rain about Fiordland. Rain gradually spreading to Bulla by tomorrow night while clearing from Fiordland. For Southland and Otago, high cloud developing, a few showers developing tomorrow morning, clearing from Southland early tomorrow night and becoming mainly fine. Chatham Islands, low cloud clearing and becoming fine tonight, cloud returning tomorrow afternoon. You're listening to RNZ National. It's coming up to 5:08.
Thanks very much, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet, in tonight for Lisa Owen. First, after years of negotiations, New Zealand and China have struck a deal on the long-awaited upgrade to the free trade deal. It includes new rules to make exporting to China cheaper and easier, the highest level of commitment to environmental standards that China has made in any free trade deal, and giving the vast majority of wood and paper trade to China preferential access over the next 10 years. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, made the announcement at the East Asia Summit in Bangkok, where she's just met with the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. We will go to our political editor, Jane Patterson, shortly. The trial of the man accused of murdering the British backpacker Grace Millane has begun, with the judge warning the jury they'll need to put any feelings of sympathy and prejudice aside. Ms Millane went missing on the eve of her 22nd birthday last December while she was in New Zealand on her OE. Her disappearance sparked a massive police investigation and her body was found buried in the Waitakere Ranges a week later. Our reporter Sarah Robson is covering the case at the High Court in Auckland.
The 27-year-old man accused of murdering Grace Millane walked into the courtroom wearing a navy suit and black shirt, clasping his hands behind him. The man, whose name is suppressed, repeated his not guilty plea.
We were charged that between 1 December 2018 and 2 December 2018 at Auckland murdered Grace Emmy Rose Millane. How do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Grace Millane arrived in New Zealand in late November last year. She had left the UK 6 weeks earlier to travel the world after finishing university. She was reported missing by her family on the 5th of December after they hadn't heard from her for several days. Justice Moore told the court it was common knowledge Ms Millane died in the accused man's Auckland hotel apartment, sometime on the night of the 1st and 2nd of December. Her body was found a week later buried in bush in the Waitakere Ranges. Justice Moore told jurors they had to put sympathy and prejudice aside when considering the case.
Now, I know that's often easier said than done, but every juror has a duty to put feelings of sympathy or prejudice to one side and approach their task coolly and dispassionately. And that's particularly important in this case, which has received such an enormous amount of media publicity.
And Justice Moore said Ms Millane's disappearance and the subsequent discovery of her body was the subject of intense media attention, both here and overseas.
Vigils in her memory were held across the country. There were marches and other public events held in December last year. All sorts of comments expressing sympathy towards her family were published. Politicians and significant others waded into the debate.
That media coverage was inescapable.
No one in this country, unless they were out of all communication with the modern world, could not have been aware of these events. The story took the nation by storm, and that interest continues today.
About 20 journalists, including international media outlets, were in court today, filling 3 courtroom benches. And before the jury was selected, Justice Moore had this instruction for them.
If you attended any of the vigils or marches or other public events which were held in December last year in relation to Ms Millane's death, that is also something which you must disclose to me before you take your seat in the jury box.
A jury of 7 women and 5 men has been selected to hear the case, which is set down for 4 weeks. The accused man is being represented by defence lawyers Ian Brookie, Ron Mansfield and Claire Farquhar. The Crown's case will be prosecuted by Robin McCoubrey, Brian Dickey and Latia Tuiburerevu. It expects to call almost 40 witnesses to give evidence, including Ms Millane's father, David. The Crown will open its case on Wednesday morning. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It's 13 minutes past 5. We're returning now to that breaking news out of Bangkok, really, where Jacinda Ardern has been meeting with the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. They've struck a long-awaited upgrade to the free trade deal. Now, it includes rules to make exporting to China cheaper and easier, the highest level of commitment to environmental standards China's made in any free trade deal, and they'll give the vast majority of wood and paper trade going to China preferential access over the next 10 years. So that announcement made at the East Asia Summit, at that meeting between the Chinese and New Zealand leaders. Our political editor Jane Patterson is there and joins us now. Good evening, Jane. How big a deal is this?
Look, this is a big deal. New Zealand has been working towards this upgrade for the last 3 years, and it was always sort of on the table since that original FTA was signed with China in 2008. Now, the main benefits for New Zealand exporters are it's just going to be easier to get fresh product like seafood, for example, over the border. And the Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, mentioned that having consistency at different ports around China would make a huge difference. Now, also environmental considerations. The government said it's the highest level of commitment that China's given in any FTA. And also one sector that's really been looking at this very keenly is the forestry sector. Tariffs had been reduced on raw product, but value-added product, processed wood here had been exempt. So this agreement will cover most of those products, but it will come in over the next 10 years. Now, no change for dairy. The government's view was that they'd got a pretty good deal that comes into force eventually by 2025. That was basically left off the table in these talks.
Now, there's always a quid pro quo in these deals, so what do we owe the Chinese?
That's right. A lot of commentary around this was actually we have very little to offer China in terms of opening any trade because we are such a liberalised trading nation. So the quid pro quo in this is for visa allocations for jobs that Chinese nationals come to New Zealand to do under the FTA. There's no increase in the number of visa allocations, but basically the kind of jobs that they'll be able to do have changed, or haven't changed, but there'll be more visas for jobs like tour guides and now a new definition of tour specialists in the tourism field, and also for Mandarin language speakers. So the number for those visas will increase, but as I said, the cap for total visa allocation stays the same.
Right. What else is happening at the summit there, Jane? What can we look forward to the next day or so?
So it's still mid-morning here, and we have another full afternoon of events before the Prime Minister jumps on a plane and flies back later tonight. But the next big one here is the RCEP Summit. Now, that's the big regional comprehensive trade deal, and if concluded, it would cover about half the world's population. It's a big deal, and that too has taken years and years and years, and there's been very little progress. A faint glimmer of optimism, I might say, from Ms Ardern and Damien O'Connor today. India has been the country holding out. The other countries have apparently reached a consensus on it, but there may be some announcement this afternoon after that summit. Then a bilateral as well with Robert O'Brien, who is here representing the US. Some reaction in some of the ASEAN countries before this that not having Vice President Pence or President Trump here was a snub to the nation. Jacinda Ardern will meet with Robert O'Brien, and she said any view on who should be here for the US is a matter for that country.
And just before you go there, Jane, any of New Zealand's diplomats or indeed our Prime Minister, any of the wiser on sheep placenta cream?
Well, everyone was slightly bemused, I must say, including the Prime Minister and Damien O'Connor. So, no, the journalists have been talking about what exactly it is. And, no, we're not really much the wiser, except that it seems to be viewed as having great health benefits here in Thailand. So, a new one to look out for.
Thanks so much. Thanks for bringing us the very latest there. Jane Patterson, our political editor, live there in Bangkok, where our Prime Minister has met and struck a deal with the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang on the latest upgrade to the free trade agreement. Speaking about sheep placenta cream, the world's biggest producer of placenta serum has invited the Prime Minister to their Hawke's Bay factory upon her return to New Zealand, as Jane said, later tonight. Well, probably tomorrow, our time. During talks with the Thai Prime Minister in Bangkok, Jacinda Ardern was caught by surprise when Prayut Chan-o-cha named sheep placenta cream as an example of how the two countries could work more closely together on high-value agricultural goods. While Ms Ardern and Agricultural Minister Damien O'Connor were seemingly in the dark, it turns out placenta products are hugely popular in many Asian countries, and some Kiwi companies are cashing in on the demand. Anusha Bradley reports.
A sight never before.
Visit any souvenir shop along Auckland's Queen Street, and among the pots of Manuka honey and merino socks, there's guaranteed to be a range of placenta creams and pills on offer. One shop owner told RNZ the New Zealand-made products are highly sought after by many tourists, mostly Asian, but increasingly American and British visitors. AgriLab's Co-Products, based in Waipukuro, is the biggest producer of placenta serum used by companies all over the world to make their creams and supplements. Its owner, Angela Payne, describes herself as the placenta queen, with her company selling around $2.5 million of the product each year.
Depending on what circles you mix in, sheep placenta is really well known, and certainly in Central Hawke's Bay, I'm known as the placenta queen, because I've been collecting placenta for years, and we've had a risk management program, which is an export verified system for collecting sheep placenta, horse placenta, pig placenta, deer placenta and cow placenta, and we collect that from all over the country and export it all over the world.
Angela Payne says placenta products have been used in traditional Chinese medicine for centuries to improve skin health and combat stress.
The cosmetic side always gets all the publicity, but the much bigger market is for sheep placenta as a dietary supplement ingredient, and it's absolutely rich in amino acids and specific amino acids. And part of nature, from many, many species, animals eat their own placenta or eat placenta after birth, and it's full of all sorts of nourishment, and so in many markets where they're into placenta, they see it as a management tool for stress, and it's really only New Zealanders that are behind in understanding it as a really valuable product.
So do placenta creams and pills work? The president of the New Zealand Dermatological Society, Louise Riker, says while sheep placenta creams might give New Zealand an economic boost on the world stage, there's no evidence they help the skin more than any other moisturiser.
They are popular because people believe that using newborn products have got lots of growth factors in them that'll be higher in nutrient value. And they think that the collagen base will help to restore collagen loss in skin as it ages. But the problem is that those very large molecules don't penetrate through intact.
Dr. Riker says quality food and sun protection are the only scientifically proven things to improve skin. The size of the local and international market for placenta products isn't clear. Stats NZ doesn't collect such figures, and agricultural analysts and academics say it's not on their radar. So perhaps the Prime Minister can be excused from being clueless about sheep placenta cream, but it's something Angela Payne is keen to change.
I emailed her about 2 seconds after the story broke and invited her to come and visit us, and I also told her about how AgriLab is a processor and world supplier of not just sheep placenta but pig, horse, deer and cow placenta, so that she can be better briefed for her next trade visit.
Ms Payne hopes Jacinda Ardern takes her up on her offer. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It's 21.5 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. We're keen for your feedback as always. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or get in touch on email. Our address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. If you follow us on Twitter or Facebook, you can also leave a comment and we'll see if we can get to your feedback throughout tonight's program. The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, has appeared in court in his own legal dispute with the Crown and opposition MPs, denouncing what he called a malicious leak of his private details. Mr Peters took the stand to give evidence on the first day of his privacy case at the High Court in Auckland. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, was there.
A sight never before seen in the High Court. The acting Prime Minister suing members of the opposition, top civil servants, even a government department.
Is your full name Winston Raymond Peters? Are you a Member of Parliament and do you reside in Northland?
It is, I am, and I do.
The New Zealand First Leader in the witness stand and laying out his case that his privacy was breached in the heat of the 2017 election campaign.
There was no scandal, just a malicious leak which mixes fact with a deliberate falsehood, accusing me of lying.
The case centres on how details of Winston Peters' pension overpayment became public. His key objection, that officials should never have notified their ministers, that there was no reason for them to do so. The then boss of the Ministry of Social Development, Brendan Boyle, informed his minister, Anne Tolley, under the so-called No Surprises Convention. The State Services Commissioner, Peter Hughes, did the same with Paula Bennett.
I find it repugnant, and I believe any New Zealander would equally find it repugnant if their private dealings with MSD were released to ministers who have no responsibility in the issue. In my case, ministers who are my political opponents a month out from a general election.
Mr Peters is seeking $450,000 in damages from each minister, as well as from the civil servants. The lawyer for both ministers, Bruce Gray QC, questioned whether it was appropriate for Mr Peters to seek such large sums.
Well, you're suing for a lot of money, Mr Peters, and you're asking the court to award in your favour a lot of money to be paid by mostly private individuals.
The question prompting an incredulous response from Mr Peters. He said the damages would be covered by the taxpayer and stressed the importance of his legal action.
You spend a life trying to build a character and reputation and defend it as hard as you can. For someone to destroy it in the space of 15 seconds without merit and without foundation is just wrong.
Both Mrs Bennett and Ms Tolley are expected to give their evidence later this week. The Deputy PM has the top job today and tomorrow, with Jacinda Ardern overseas. But with his attention at the High Court in Auckland, others have had to pick up the slack. Labour's Kelvin Davis chaired Cabinet this morning. The hearing is set down for 3 weeks, but may not run that full length. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
It's 25 minutes past 5. A jury in Dunedin has heard a former doctor allegedly killed a 16-year-old girl to stop her coming forward with allegations of inappropriate behaviour. Vinod Skantha is on trial for murdering Amber Rose Rush and threatening to kill 4 others to cover up the crime. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown was in court and filed this report.
On February the 3rd last year, Amber Rose Rush was found dead in her bed by her mother in the Dunedin suburb of Corstorphine. She had suffered stab wounds to her neck and throat, and there had been an attempt to slash her throat. Her death and the subsequent suspected suicide of her mother sparked a torrent of vitriol online, which Justice Gerald Nation addressed before the jury was selected.
In this case, I'm aware of significant posts that were placed by a number of people on the social media platform of the Dunedin News Facebook group soon after the victim's death. Not surprisingly, a number of those posts were intensely emotional. On occasion, some comments included statements that were factually incorrect. Others showed feelings of prejudice towards the defendant.
Justice Nation said potential jurors would need to stand aside if they participated in online commentary. More than 100 potential jurors were summoned to the Dunedin law courts for the trial, with a jury of 10 men and 2 women selected. In opening the Crown's case, prosecutor Richard Smith told the jury Miss Rush and Mr Skantha shared a text exchange on the day of her death, detailing inappropriate behaviour by him.
Those allegations were in essence threefold: providing minors with alcohol, touching up young persons without consent, as she put it, and offering minors money for sex.
The Crown claims shortly before midnight, Mr Skantha was driven to Miss Rush's home by a teenage associate. Mr Smith says Mr Skantha entered the house using a spare key and went into Miss Rush's room, smothering her with a pillow while he stabbed her and then took her phone containing the incriminating conversation.
The Crown says the defendant had a very strong motive for wanting Amber Rush dead, to silence her. Amber had been quite clear in the text message conversation with the defendant on the evening of 2 February 2018 that she intended to take her allegations of inappropriate behaviour by the defendant to both his employer and the police.
Mr Smith says Mr Skantha was then driven to Blackhead Quarry, where he disposed of the phone, and then to his girlfriend's house in Balclutha, where he got rid of other evidence, including his bloodied clothes. Defence lawyer Jonathan Eaton QC says the defence doesn't need to prove Mr Skantha's innocence.
The defence case is that the evidence that the Crown rely upon is either untruthful, that is to say it is lies, unreliable, meaning to say it's not safe, or otherwise there is an explanation inconsistent with the explanation that the Crown has seized upon.
The court this afternoon heard evidence from the first witnesses, including written statements from Miss Rush's deceased mother. The trial is expected to last about a month, with more than 90 witnesses to be called. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
It's 28 and a half minutes past 5 on Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. Coming up on the programme, allegations of animal cruelty threaten to overshadow the Melbourne Cup tomorrow, the great car park squeeze at Christchurch Hospital, and the Playboy penguin who's ruffling feathers in Wellington. We'd love your feedback. Get in touch on the phone, on the text 2101 is the number. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, or Checkpoint email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. First, here's Susanna Leatawa with the headlines.
Thank you, Alex. After years of negotiations, New Zealand and China have a new free trade deal. It makes exporting to China cheaper and easier, sets the highest level of commitment to environmental standards China has made in any such deal, and gives the country preferential access to New Zealand's wood and paper trade for a decade. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made the announcement at the East Asia Summit, where she's just met with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. The lawyer acting for a former Dunedin doctor on trial for murdering a teenage girl says his client is innocent and never threatened anyone. Vinod Skantha is charged with murdering 16-year-old Amber Rose Rush in Dunedin in February 2018. The Crown says Mr Skantha killed the teenager to stop her coming forward with claims that would have cost him his job as a doctor. A lawyer who represents a number of survivors of institutional abuse has told the Royal Commission of someone who was given painful injections as a punishment. Sonia Cooper says the most common complaints in psychiatric hospitals were about severe physical assaults at the hands of staff and other patients, and sexual violation and abuse. She says one former patient talked about being given painful injections as a punishment. Local councils can now set fishing regulations after a watershed court decision today. Despite opposition from the fishing industry, the Court of Appeal decided the Bay of Plenty Regional Council can impose restrictions around Mōtiti Island for biodiversity reasons. The decision means all councils can set fishing restrictions through the Resource Management Act. Tens of thousands of people on expiring provisional licences are getting a reprieve. Until now, learner and restricted drivers had 5 years to move on to the next licence. But it was announced today over 144,000 drivers will get an extra 2 years. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Nona Peltier joined us now in the studio for the business news. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
We're looking at Westpac New Zealand. They're saying profits are under pressure. Why is that?
Yeah, competition is one reason. The other reason is interest rates. Of course, the lower interest rates has really squeezed their margins because there's only you can only cut so far, really, when you think about, on one hand, they're loaning money, but on the other hand, they're paying interest on deposit. And so that's still costing them something. You can't, that's how it works. So there's a squeeze on the margin between what they're paying in interest and what they're earning in interest. That's one reason. So their interest income was flat. They had some non-interest income, right, like the sale of Paymark for one thing, that helped boost their profits. But basically, their profit was up 3%. Now, I don't know, you're not going to shed any tears here.
No, I was just going to say, I thought ANZ were doing much worse, and Westpac's looked pretty good in comparison. $964 million was their net profit, so it's still pretty good. And when you look at your cash earnings, it was over $1 billion. So good result, full year result. That's $1 billion. New Zealand doesn't
dollars.
Sound like a squeeze to me, no.
Well, it is a squeeze. But nevertheless, they've spent a lot more money on improving their compliance, and they've used technology to do that. So it's just to eliminate any risk of, overcharging customers. So human error, a lot of it's now been automated so that there's checks and balances in place. They were also given 18 months by the RBNZ, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, to straighten out their risk assessment and compliance with what they call capital reserve. They had not been holding enough in reserve. And anyway, we spoke with David McLean this afternoon, and I asked him about how all of this is shaping up with his result, and this is what he had to say.
I think we've delivered a balanced result in a challenging environment, focused on improving the banking experience and delivering great customer outcomes with investment to back that up, and in an environment where there's really strong competition, and it's a great environment to be a bank customer.
Why so?
Because rates are very low, and all of the banks are investing in delivering better outcomes and guaranteeing better services and products for the customers, so better than it's ever been before.
So in terms of the low level of bad debt, what do you attribute that to?
That's just the strong economy at work. When we're seeing across most sectors in our balance sheet, everyone's doing quite well, and there's very, very low level of defaults. The only ones who are still struggling a bit are dairy farmers, some of whom are only just clearing their costs of production, and so that is creating some stress on them and their families.
And that's the Chief Executive of Westpac New Zealand, David McLean.
And how did they go compared to the Aussie parent company, same name?
So Westpac Group, now you're going to, come on, keep a straight face with me here. They had a disappointing result with a net profit was down 16%. They only made 6.8 billion Australian dollars in the past year.
Wow, 16% lower. How many billion?
6.8.
6.8 billion.
Yeah, the year before they made, over $8 billion, Australian dollars. Wow. Now, of course, this bank has been in a bit of trouble, like a number of banks across the Tasman.
Royal Commission.
Yes, indeed. So they're going to be raising 2.5 billion Australian dollars to strengthen their finances and to pay for some of the fallout from the inquiry over there, which was looking at the the misconduct of the financial sector generally, and Westpac was caught up in that.
Right, okay. Now, looking at the markets before you go.
That's right. Now, our market did pretty good today. We rose more than 1/3%. That was up 40 points. That's 40 to 10,802. And our dollar is trading a little bit stronger at 64.6 US cents, 93.3 Australian. Stuck in the same rut there with the British pence at 49.9 pence.
Oh, almost there. Hey, thanks so much, Nona. Nona Peltier there with the markets and the latest in the business news. It's just gone 25 minutes to 6. Across the ditch now to the race that stops a nation. That's tomorrow, but the Melbourne Cup is being overshadowed by an expose that one researcher says is shaking the Australian horse racing industry to its core. Footage of trained and celebrated racehorses whipped and beaten, given electric shocks, kicked in the head and slaughtered at pet food knackeries where the law says they should not be. An ABC investigation is putting the heat on the New South Wales racing industry as it denies the scale of the carnage. It says around 34 horses a year end up at the slaughterhouse, but the 7:30 report investigation revealed there were more than 4,000 racehorses in the past year killed at one abattoir alone, with their identities laid bare due to the brandings of iconic horse studs. Now, Professor Paul McGreevy from Sydney University's School of Veterinary Science has done extensive research into the treatment of racehorses over the last 25 years. I started by asking him how the country is reacting to what was revealed by the ABC and a warning to those who are watching. There's some graphic footage in this story.
What we saw on ABC's 7:30 report really did shock the industry and the nation to its core, because we were seeing images of horses that were not supposed to be where they ended up in abattoirs and knackeries. There was a very bold step by Racing New South Wales to say that horses would not end up in those situations. And we were full of admiration when that statement was made in 2017. But then the footage became available to a journalist, and the ABC journalist showed me the footage, and I could very quickly see that the impact would be profound. The Australian public will not forget the vision of the use of electric shock devices on the genitals of horses, horses' heads being kicked by slaughtermen, and horses unfortunately receiving multiple captive bolt shots to the head, on one occasion 5 shots before the horse died. And what's particularly galling about this, I think, Alex, is that these are not feral animals that have to be herded and pushed and moved around as if they are intractable. These are animals that, as trained former racehorses, could have been led gently with a head collar to their demise. So it was. I think it was that combination of the animals being in the wrong place and being treated so poorly that has galvanised some opinion. The racing industry has certainly stepped up and said that they want to ensure that this never happens again. Yeah. But tracing horses is a big trick.
Right, yeah, and that seemed to be the real sort of killer blow in that investigation, to be able to trace the brandings of the horses back to particular studs, to particular racing studs that at least bred or maybe trained these racehorses. But to go back to what you said about the combination of that footage, that graphic footage, because I think anyone watching that would be dismayed that any animal is treated in that way. So perhaps there's that issue of how any ordinary animal is treated at a slaughterhouse. Also, combined with that as perhaps a separate issue, that these are racehorses that perhaps some of them are not past, racing, or they're just past their best, and they're part of a systematic approach of mass breeding, and where they cannot simply be put out to pasture once they are past their best. Talk to us about that.
Right, yeah, well, you touched on 2 important things there, Alex. It's worth thinking about the thoroughbred industry as being 2 industries. You've got the racing industry and the breeding industry. And the racing industry's job is to put on races with a high regard for welfare of horses and for the integrity of the horses on the track, the integrity of the races and the safety of the jockeys. The breeding industry supplies the animals for that spectacle, and there are big dollars involved in getting foals onto the ground. There's one horse in the Hunter Valley, not too far from me, whose service fee is well over $300,000 per pop. So there are big forces at play that want to keep the breeding industry very buoyant. There has been a retraction in numbers over the last 10 years or so, but we're dealing at the moment with somewhere around 13,000 to 14,000 foals hitting the ground every season, and the industry itself is beginning to recognise that could be excessive. There's one trainer, a leading trainer, who's suggested that 10,000 would be a better figure to aim for.
Right,
and
because it seems like the actual Racing Australia is in denial about the extent of this problem. They're saying, according to the ABC report, that around 34 horses a year are ending up at the slaughterhouses, but this ABC report heard that about 4,000 a year are being killed in one abattoir alone. So do you find perhaps that the industry still has to face up to the issue?
Yes, and that's why this has come at a very interesting time, Alex, because quite apart from this developing story, the government was looking at the merits of a national horse traceability register. So that was already in play. That's an attempt to keep every horse, not just race horses, under some sort of monitoring system to know where they end up. And that, as it happens, was the initiative brought about by the mother of a young girl who died at a technical college at a TAFE in Dubbo. This young girl was on a Gillaroo course, and she was riding a horse that was branded a beginner's horse. It was labelled a beginner's horse, but it turned out when she unfortunately fell and died, that the coroner inquiry revealed that horse had been racing 3 weeks before he was used as a beginner's ride. So the impetus to get horses traced, to make sure that horses can be traced, came from this rather awfully sad story that galvanised this mother, Juliana Waugh, who's since got an Australian award for her work, to make sure that this doesn't happen again by ensuring that horses are traced.
This breeding program we're talking about, which is fueling the problem of these horses seemingly going en masse to the slaughterhouse, I guess it's to get faster, healthier, better performing, more productive horses that win you lots of prize money. But if you look at the Melbourne Cup tomorrow, it looks like more than half of the horses are coming from overseas. So, I mean, is the system even working at all in terms of breeding healthy Australian fast racehorses?
Well, Australia loves its 2-year-old racing, and that's quite a different game to the Melbourne Cup. Our obsession with finding the latest, greatest, fastest 2-year-old is probably core here, because our interest in finding those young horses means that we do get them into work very early, and the rather troubling statistic is that only 65% of the horses actually make it to the track. So the foals that are born of the foal crop every year, 35% don't even race. So we need to ask why that is and whether we could actually breed for more durable horses.
Finally, before you go, Paul, what's your observation of how this expose has impacted people's approach to the Melbourne Cup? It's a big thing. It's a public holiday in Victoria. There's lots of betting. People take the day off, or at least the afternoon off work in other states just to watch it. It's interesting. People in New Zealand take great interest in it as well. Has that waned? Is there a reaction? It's got its own problems. 6 racehorses have died in the last 6 years running that race as well, so it's got issues too.
Yes, it's an interesting social event, Alex. A lot of people don't really take much notice of the horses. They're there for what's called the nipple and the tipple. So I suppose there will be a thirst for that sort of celebration of Aussie devil may care attitude, but more and more people are saying nup to the cup. The Australian Greens are promoting that approach, and we're in interesting times because we may end up being world leaders in horse welfare if this galvanising process continues.
That's Professor Paul McGreevy. And if you are going to go back on Facebook or our website or YouTube and watch that story, just a warning, there are some graphic images, as was revealed in ABC's 7:30 report. There will be no doubt more on that. The Melbourne Cup was at 5 p.m. Our program time tomorrow, always the first Tuesday in November. It's coming up to 5:45. A bit more of a cheery story now. Celebrations have been continuing in South Africa to mark the country's victory in the Rugby World Cup final against England. Nowhere more so than in the township of Zwide in Port Elizabeth. That's the home of Siya Kolisi, the team's first black captain. The BBC's Andrew Harding paid a visit to the humble beginnings of South Africa's latest rugby superstar.
On the street where Siya Kolisi grew up, his neighbours are still singing his name and comparing South Africa's first black rugby captain to other national icons.
Siya is Nelson Mandela of sport.
Kolisi's younger brother, Lonwabo, welcomes visitors into the family's humble home.
His first picture, when I saw it,
So Siya's brother is showing me a collection of very old photos here that he's brought down from the top of a cupboard. Under 13A Rugby Cape Town tour. Wow, what a season, it says. Siya won a rugby scholarship to a private school, the break that enabled him to move from poverty towards stardom.
This is such a huge moment for the family and the whole country. Siya is such a great inspiration for every kid who lives in the township.
Half a dozen young boys are throwing around a rugby ball here at the African Bombers Rugby Club. The pitch is rock hard, covered in litter. This is where Siya Kolisi first began to attract attention when he was a young player. He managed to rise through the ranks, but for black players during the apartheid era, the idea of becoming Springbok captain was simply impossible.
South Africa is a beautiful country. It's got beautiful people, but it needs healing. And that healing must be sustainable.
As a young black player, Zola Yeye's career stalled. But later, after apartheid had ended, he became the first black manager of the Springboks and a believer in sport's power to change society.
Social cohesion is an unfinished business because South Africa is work in progress.
A cleaner sweeps away after the celebrations here, but how long will the excitement, the euphoria last?
Life is hard here, you know.
Still hard?
Yeah, still is. Things have not changed much for all of us.
And do you feel as if moments like this, moments of extraordinary achievement, that they do inspire?
They do, because I mean, coming from where we come from, a land of no opportunities, it becomes, people think it's far-fetched, but then once it does happen, it becomes a norm, sort of, because now there's going to be kids that want to see themselves in Siya's position one day, whether it's sports, whether it's music, whether it's whatever. But then what Siya did is exceptional.
And inspiration is badly needed here. A little Mandela magic in a country that some feel has lost its way.
Andrew Harding reporting from the township of Zwide in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, on that heartwarming backstory, really, to the latest South African World Cup winning captain. It's coming up to 11 and a half minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. Do keep your feedback coming in. We'll see if we can get to some of it before the hour. You can text us on 2101. Checkpoint at at Checkpoint RNZ is the Twitter handle, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. To Christchurch now, where nurses at Christchurch hospitals say their safety is under threat because of a lack of staff car parks near the building. They say they've often forced to turn up hours early or sleep in the car just to secure a park before their shift. Now, it follows the death of hospital worker Kenneth McCall. He was killed last month when his car was hit during a police pursuit. He left his house in the early hours of the morning and planned on sleeping in his car to get a park near the hospital. Our South Island reporter Logan Church spoke to others who get up early to avoid the rush.
I think it's about 10 to 6 in the morning. We are on Selwyn Street between Hagley and Morehouse, and I parked my car here to get to work.
That's Rosie, a nurse at Christchurch Hospital up the road. We're about a 10-minute walk to work.
But she has to arrive at least an hour early to park here, some of the only free on-street parking.
At this time of year it's not as bad, but middle of winter it's cold, it's pitch black, it's a safety issue really. I've had one car stolen and one car with a window smashed in. We're told to walk with our scissors in our pocket, and I don't think that should be really necessary, quite frankly. It's pretty bad.
As we walk to Rosie's work, we talk about that safety issue. Last April, a student nurse was assaulted and robbed at knife point after she left work about 10:30 at night. In 2015, a midwife was harassed by a man smashing bottles and hurling abuse at her as she walked along the same road we are walking along now. And last month, hospital worker Kenneth McCall was killed when his car was hit during a police pursuit. He was on the roads in the early hours of the morning to secure a car park before his shift. Rosie says it's not uncommon for hospital staff to arrive at work hours before they're due to start.
I've got here at 6 and walked past people asleep in their cars.
The CDHB has almost half the number of staff car parks now than it did before the earthquakes. And despite this issue being known for years, a fix has not yet been found. There is simply not the space. So how many car parks are there? Prior to the Canterbury earthquakes, the CDHB had 1,400 car parks available for its staff. But now, only 800, including 430 in this Antigua Street car parking building. Now, about 2,000 staff have access to this building, but 300 people are on its waiting list.
I personally have access to it for night shifts, which is good, but I've been with the DHB for 2 years and I'm still like 200 on the list for during the day. It's quite a small car park and there are just so many employees because you've got doctors, nurses and everything else.
About 5,000 in total. The CDHB has grappled with this issue for the better part of the decade, and no nurse or staff member we spoke to blamed management for the lack of parking. They believed they were doing the best with what they've got. But they are worried that a long-term fix isn't coming. Chief Executive David Mates says the car parking situation has been complicated since the earthquakes.
Since the earthquakes, we've demolished 44 buildings, including significant parking buildings. And what's compounded that also has been the removal of free on-street car parking, which has now become time limited and charged. So what that has meant is a significant reduction in the parking in and around the Christchurch Hospital campus than what used to exist.
He says there are two ongoing pieces of work which will hopefully come up with a solution. The first is looking at a parking strategy for the area with other authorities in the city.
We have been working with a cross-agency working group that includes the City Council, Otakaro, the University of Otago, the District Health Board, to explore a range of options close to Christchurch Hospital, and we're getting closer to being able to, I think, provide certainly an interim parking solution. It will not meet all of the needs of the Christchurch campus, but will be a significant improvement particularly for the public accessing Christchurch Hospital.
If that goes ahead, that would make about 500 car parks available, mainly for the public. Mr Mates hopes that can be announced in the coming 3 to 4 weeks. The second body of work is looking at a long-term fix with the Ministry of Health.
That is still a work in progress and probably a longer-term process. And I suspect that might be better for you to speak directly with the Ministry on.
So there's no timeline on that, at least from your end?
Not at this stage, no.
The Ministry of Health says in a statement it acknowledges the frustrations around car parking at the hospital for staff and patients. It says, however, it is taking longer than planned due to additional site planning and changes to the wider hospital campus development, which is still to be confirmed. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
It's 6 minutes to 6, 3 days into the annual fireworks sale, and already Fire and Emergency has racked up dozens of call-outs, including to fireworks being shot out of moving cars. It's prompted renewed calls for a ban on the boom, with those opposed calling on the government to make this the last year fireworks are sold to the public. But fireworks retailers say they're an important part of New Zealand tradition and culture and are adamant that they're here to stay. Our reporter Anita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Monroe looked into the fiery and, explosive debate?
Remember the 5th of November. Of course, it's Guy Fawkes, an occasion which brings with it 4 days of public fireworks sales.
In this pack we've got a few fountains, some smaller novelty items. This is our candle pack, so it's probably our best-selling product. This basically has all the good and the big stuff in it with the big bangs. The grunty stuff, cakes and candles, and made for the real pyros out there.
It's been a busy time for Stephen Cove, the director of fireworks importer Boom Brothers. He's been selling fireworks for about 8 years.
It represents, I think, a Kiwi tradition that that we have grown up with through generations.
But it's possible his days in the fireworks business are numbered. Multiple councils around the country have banned them in public places, and there are growing calls for private sales to be stopped altogether.
Remember the 5th of November. Who knows what happened on the 5th of November? Who knows who Guy Fawkes even was? You know, it's time we grew up as a nation and celebrated the things that really matter to us.
Auckland Councillor Kathy Casey says the time to ban the boom is now.
Well, as a council, we have banned fireworks in all our public places. You can't set off fireworks on a beach, in a park, or on a street. We're on the Monga. The Tupuna Monga Authority have banned fireworks from our Monga. So that's the extent of our powers. We cannot tell you what to do in private property. That's over to the government. We want the ban on the private sale and use of fireworks, and that's what Auckland has said. Now that's what the councils of New Zealand have said. Several petitions have said it. Now it's up to the government to do it.
She says the piles of waste, as well as the harm caused to animals and humans, mean they're just not worth it.
We can have public displays where people come along and enjoy fireworks in a safe manner. Australia banned them 30 years ago. It's like we're way behind the 8 ball.
Fireworks went on sale on Saturday, and Fire and Emergency spokesman Mike Shaw says crews have attended more than 40 related incidents since then.
People are out there with flammable items and they're firing them up in the sky and firing them all around. Although we did have a worrying incident where some people were firing fireworks out of a moving vehicle and they were firing them at people. This is just not good behaviour and it's not sensible.
While Mike Shaw says behaviour around fireworks has gotten slightly better over the years, public support for the backyard displays appears to be waning. A recent Auckland Council survey received 8,000 submissions, nearly 90% of which oppose the public sale of fireworks. The SPCA has also called for a ban, and Kathy Casey will be making a submission to a parliamentary select committee later this month, asking the government to stop their sale altogether.
In 10 years, there have been 4,200 injuries related to fireworks, and that's just the ones that went through ACC, not directly to hospital, at a cost of nearly $4 million. One of those was one too many. We can stop this. We stop private sale and use. We stop injuring people. We stop injuring animals. We stop injuring wildlife. It's about time we became a safe society, the one that we tell everybody we are.
But Stephen Cove isn't convinced by the opposition.
Those petitions and those surveys are largely skewed, and that's simply because those that dislike something always have a louder voice.
He says public displays are costly and doesn't believe they'll be funded by councils across the country.
I think that if fireworks are used responsibly and to the instructions that are on each firework, we wouldn't have I wouldn't say we wouldn't have no problems, but we would have less problems. If people didn't like fireworks, I wouldn't have a business, and neither would any of my competitors.
The decision on whether backyard fireworks displays will fizzle out or continue to bang on sits with the government, and any decision on their future appears to be some time away. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
And you can go back and watch that if you like on our website or on Facebook or YouTube. Some nice pictures, including one firework that looked huge, a bit more like a bazooka. Anyway, get in touch with what you think. No doubt there'll be a lot of opinions on that. Don't break the text machine, but 2101 is the number. You can get us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz on the email, and of course we're on Twitter and Facebook as well if you want to drop a comment there. Just before we get to the news, there has been some feedback on some of our other stories. Sheep placenta cream. This is something the Thai PM put on the agenda yesterday that we heard about, and we'll hear a little bit more in the program. Patricia says the proof of the pudding is in the eating. People wouldn't buy products if they don't work. Interesting point of view. The placenta rabbit hole is vomit-inducing. This is another listener. fudge, I don't even know how to pronounce that word. It's a growing thing and an actual word, okay, there you go, which has absolutely no benefits and a few dangers. Doctors are saying stop it. There you go. There's someone with an alternate view. And someone else says, we're in Southland and we were collecting sheep placentas years ago for cosmetics. So this is something that's been around in a while. We will get to some more of that feedback after the 6 o'clock news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata at DNA. New Zealand and China have agreed on an upgrade to their free trade deal after 3 years of negotiation. It includes new rules to make exporting to China cheaper and easier and the highest level of commitment to environmental standards China has made in any free trade deal. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made the announcement at the East Asia Summit where she's just met with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. She says New Zealand was the first to sign a free trade agreement with China in 2008.
That, of course, means that things change. We need to make sure that with an agreement, that where there have been other agreements, we're maintaining the best access possible, but also that it's moving with new developments as well.
Jacinda Ardern says two-way trade has trebled from about $8 billion a year to more than $28 billion since 2008. The lawyer acting for a former Dunedin doctor on trial for the murder of a teenage girl says his client is innocent and never threatened anyone. Bernard Scanther is charged with murdering 16-year-old Amber Rose Rush in her Corstorphine home in Dunedin last year. He is also facing charges of threatening to kill 4 others. The prosecution says Mr Scanther killed the teen to stop her coming forward with claims of sexual harassment and offering minors money for sex. But defence lawyer Jonathan Eaton QC says Mr Scanther did not commit the crimes. A lawyer who represents a number of survivors of institutional abuse has spoken of an ongoing culture of violence, welfare homes and psychiatric hospitals. The second week of hearings at the Royal Commission into Institutional Abuse between the 1950s and 1990s is underway in Auckland. Andrew McRae reports.
Sonia Cooper says by far the most common complaints in psychiatric hospitals were severe physical assaults at the hands of staff and other patients and sexual violation and abuse. She says punishments included painful injections, electroconvulsive treatment without anaesthetic, and being held up by 4 staff members and then dropped on the concrete. Ms Cooper says complaints not dealt with properly have exposed vulnerable children to further abuse. She says other assaults took a more insidious form under the cover of medical examinations. In Auckland, ko Andrew McRae Tēnei.
Live-in residents believe there's no systemic problem in the area with young people targeting the elderly. A 90-year-old woman was attacked in her home at the weekend. Grey Power President Terry Hemmingson says an increasing number of elderly people in Live-in are reporting knocking on their doors, sometimes late at night. However, a spokesperson for Age Concern in Live-in, Dan Geraghty, says he doesn't agree with that.
Tomorrow or next week or 6 months' time, it could happen in Napier, Otago, anywhere. Home invasions occur.
Dan Geraghty says there'll be door-knocking nearby residents tomorrow to remind them how to keep safe. 3 teenage girls appeared in court this afternoon. They've been remanded on bail and will reappear in the Live-in Youth Court next week. US President Donald Trump is threatening to cut funding for the wildfire sweep in California in an online spat with the state's governor. Nearly 40,000 hectares have been destroyed by wildfires in recent weeks and thousands have been forced from their homes. The BBC's Chris Buckler reports.
Over the last couple of weeks alone, wildfires have spread across close to 100,000 acres of land in California, and there have been several other large and destructive blazes in recent years. Donald Trump says California's Governor Gavin Newsom needs to take some responsibility for the fires and has accused him of doing a terrible job of forest management. The president also indicated that his administration was no longer prepared to offer federal financial help to the state. Mr Newsom responded on Twitter by saying that Mr Trump didn't believe in climate change and was therefore excused from the conversation about how to prevent the fires.
Chris Buckler reporting. The Dermatological Society says there is no scientific evidence that sheep placenta creams help the skin more than any other moisturiser. The warning comes after Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was caught by surprise when her Thai counterpart named sheep placenta cream as an example of how the two countries could work more closely together. The New Zealand-made placenta creams and pills are popular in Asian countries where it's believed they combat stress. The Society's President Louise Riker says there's no evidence the product works.
They think that the collagen base will help to restore collagen loss in skin as it ages, but the problem is that those very large molecules don't penetrate through.
Dr Riker says quality nutrition and sun protection are the only scientifically proven things that help skin. The total fire ban in central Otago will be lifted tomorrow, despite 4 helicopters and 6 crews fighting a blaze this afternoon. The fire at Cornish Point near Cromwell is now under control. The 3-day ban has been in place since Saturday. It's coming up to 6:05. They're world champions and the world's top-ranked men's rugby team, but the Springboks are still chasing the All Blacks. Outgoing coach Rassie Erasmus says if South Africa's to remain one of the top-ranked nations, they need to be as consistent as the All Blacks.
We're all trying to be like the All Blacks, I must be honest with you. We all know what New Zealand has done over the last 12 years. They set the bar right up there. We all know we've won the World Cup, but being New Zealand consistently over the last 12, 14 years, we're all trying to be like them.
Rassie Erasmus. The British racing driver Lewis Hamilton has become the second most successful Formula One driver of all time after claiming his 6th world title at the United States Grand Prix. Hamilton sealed this year's championship with 2nd place in Austin, Texas. It's his 6th world driver's title, moving him to within 1 championship of all-time record holder Michael Schumacher. The Breakers coach Dan Shamir admits they're just going to have to ride out their injury crisis at the club. Playing without stars Rob Lowe, Finn Delaney, and Scott Hobson, the Breakers were beaten 84-79 by defending champions Perth and Invercargill to slip to 6th on the NBL table. While disappointed with the latest result, Shamir says they can battle through it.
In the big picture, we need to survive this period of the season that we have a lot of guys out. We're playing tough teams, we're playing well. It's not an excuse and we can't be happy because we lose, but we got to keep doing the right things and good things start happening to you.
Dan Shamir. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we look back on the Rugby World Cup 2019. It's a tough assignment, so we thought we'd get both our sportscasters, Dana Johansson and Peter Lamp, on to dissect it. We have part 2 of our window on the world of the most recent bout of Northern Irish troubles, which broke out 50 years ago. And Joe Caird celebrates the working dog having its day on Nights. With me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For the whole of the North Island, mainly fine and warm with cloudy areas about western regions tonight. Isolated showers about Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, particularly the ranges, and patchy drizzle from Manawatu to Wellington tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine, high cloud developing tomorrow morning and a shower or 2 about Canterbury tomorrow night. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing, patchy drizzle about Fiordland gradually spreading to Bulla tomorrow morning, while turning to rain about Fiordland. Rain gradually spreading to Bulla by tomorrow evening, while clearing from Fiordland. For Southland and Otago, high cloud developing tonight, a few showers developing tomorrow morning, clearing from Southland early tomorrow evening and becoming mainly fine. Chatham Islands, low cloud clearing, becoming fine from tonight, cloud returning tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's coming up to 6:08.
Whawhetai lava, Susanna. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. New Zealand and China have finally reached agreement on an upgraded free trade deal. It includes new rules to make exporting to China cheaper and easier, and the highest level of commitment to environmental standards that China has made in any free trade deal. China is New Zealand's largest trading partner, with two-way trade valued at more than $28 billion last year. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern made the announcement at the East Asia Summit, where she met with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang this afternoon. She spoke to reporters in Bangkok about what the upgrade means.
Essentially means that New Zealand has the best access really of anyone in terms of our agreements. By 2024 we'll have the best access for dairy, and now we've got preferential access for 99% of our wood and paper products, so that is excellent news for our exporters.
Does that include the added value of the processed wood products, which were the one that was missing out on the tariff exemption?
So we have 99% coverage with what is being released early next year. When we finally sign the agreement, there's a little bit of legal scrubbing to be done on the text. It will go through an analysis. Until then, we're not able to give all of the final details, but it is a significant improvement for our forestry and wood processors.
Which other sectors will benefit here?
Well, we've got two other areas, I think, which are important for New Zealand's sake. We've got an upgrade in the way that we'll be dealing with environmental issues, and so that's now embedded in the text. Also, we've got a removal of some of the access issues, so we've got some delays at the border for some of our exporters, particularly in the fresh food products, which we've been able to also deal with in this agreement, so that'll have a material benefit for them as well.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern speaking to reporters in Bangkok on that freshly inked upgrade to the New Zealand-China Free Trade Agreement. It's 6:10. Levin residents are staunchly defending the safety of their town despite the horrific attack of a 90-year-old woman in her own home. The woman opened the door to 3 teenagers who said they wanted to use the toilet on Saturday afternoon. Jonathan Mitchell has more.
Horowhenua Grey Power President Terry Hemmingson says the bashing of the 90-year-old woman sadly isn't an isolated incident.
This is not the first incident I have had reported to me in the last week. Our older residents, particularly around the area by Bath Street, are reporting to me, sadly, that they are being harassed and tormented by groups of young people.
On the streets of Levin today, locals were shocked and dismayed by the attack. However, these cafe owners near the victim's house say their town is safe.
It doesn't really reflect this town at all. A lot of the people that come in early in the morning, they're business owners and stuff, and they give a lot to the community. So for something like this to be taken, to happen in the community is not a good thing.
No, and I think today with social media, things like this get out and they spread quite quickly. Becomes a talking factor, doesn't it, really? But, it's a good community. It doesn't reflect who we are, definitely.
The Horowhenua Mayor Bernie Wanden believes it's a random attack.
I don't believe that we're any worse than anywhere else. This is completely out of character for what normally happens in our community.
That's echoed by Dan Geraghty, a spokesperson for Age Concern in Levin.
Tomorrow or next week or 6 months' time, it could happen in Napier, Otago, anywhere, It will occur again. Home invasions occur. Unfortunately, this was a 90-year-old woman.
He says they'll be going door to door tomorrow to remind local residents how to keep safe. 3 young women were arrested and charged with aggravated robbery after the attack. The police area commander, Sarah Stewart, says they're not looking for anyone else.
We believe the assault from the weekend was an isolated incident, and we encourage anyone who feels unsafe at any time to contact police immediately.
The 90-year-old victim remains in hospital in a stable condition. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
And the 3 young women who were charged with aggravated robbery appeared in the Levin District Court this afternoon. They've been remanded on bail and will appear at the Levin Youth Court on November the 12th. It's just after 6:13 on Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. The government has given a reprieve to drivers with learners and restricted licences that are due to expire soon. Under current rules, those with a provisional driver's or motorcycle licence have a 5-year time limit to move on to the next stage. Otherwise, they'd need to pass another theory test to renew that licence. In an announcement today, over 144,000 drivers are to get a 2-year extension. Associate Transport Minister Julianne Genter says the current rate of learner and restricted drivers progressing to the next licence stage is far too low.
I've heard from many young drivers and their whānau and their parents that there are significant challenges to passing the restricted test. I know for many, finding over $100 to sit a full practical test is a significant barrier. And for those in rural areas, sometimes they have to drive to another town hours away in order to do a practical test. And then there's an additional barrier with a relatively high failure rate, particularly to get the restricted licence.
Now, Julianne Genter says the short-term extension avoids the risk of drivers becoming unlicensed and driving outside of the law.
This would be extremely bad from a road safety perspective and could lead to many more young people interacting with the criminal justice system. This extension is a short-term, pragmatic measure to avert this scenario. And what this situation points to is a bigger underlying problem with our driver licensing system.
Now, Ms. Genter says in the meantime, the government needs to make sure the same situation does not happen again in 2 years' time. The Transport Agency will also launch a new campaign to help drivers understand the changes and encourage them to progress to the next licence stage. A Hong Kong councillor had part of his ear bitten off and several other people were wounded in a knife attack during a pro-democracy protest in a shopping mall. It marks a dramatic escalation in the violence that's gripped Hong Kong for the last few months. The attacker, who spoke Mandarin, had been arguing over politics with protesters before taking out a knife. The man also assaulted Democratic District Councillor Andrew Chew, biting off part of his ear. The BBC's Richard Lister has the details.
Protests began peacefully enough, with demonstrators forming human chains in shopping centres. But here, in City Plaza, things soon turned violent. A man set upon protesters with a knife, injuring several. And when a pro-democracy councillor intervened, he too was attacked, and part of his ear was bitten off. The man with the knife was then beaten up by some of the protesters. But police haven't confirmed whether he was among those arrested. Elsewhere, demonstrators smashed up restaurants and riot police were brought in. At the Newtown Plaza, there was a tense standoff as police searched the complex and removed some of the protesters. They in turn harassed the police, shining laser pointers at them and throwing objects. This was the 22nd consecutive weekend of protest in Hong Kong, and after widespread and intense clashes on Saturday, it was one of the most violent for some time. Beijing has signalled it intends to toughen its stance against the protests. As yet, it's unclear when exactly that might happen or how. But as the injured were taken to hospital, the people of Hong Kong were left wondering how much longer this can continue.
Richard Lister there in Hong Kong, coming up to 17 minutes past 6. Two lawyers who've represented more than 1,000 abuse survivors have told the Royal Commission no victim has ever received adequate compensation for their suffering. The inquiry into abuse in state care as well as faith-based institutions has entered its second week of hearings in Auckland. Our reporter Andrew McRae is there.
The law firm Cooper Legal is one of only a few involved in helping survivors of institutional care take civil claims against the state and churches for abuse they suffered as children and vulnerable adults. The firm represents 1,250 clients aged between 18 and 80 and has 1,400 open files, a number which is growing. About 1,100 claims have been settled with the Ministries of Social Development, Health and Education, as well as faith-based institutions, with payments so far totalling nearly $23 million. Sonia Cooper says the vast majority of her clients are beneficiaries or low-income earners in precarious economic circumstances.
We would say that no survivor to date has received adequate compensation for the harm that has been done to them, and we say that unapologetically.
Ms Cooper says by far the most common complaints about psychiatric hospitals were severe physical assaults at the hands of staff and other patients, as well as sexual violation and abuse. She quoted a young boy who was a patient at Porirua Hospital in the 70s and a punishment called the concrete pill.
And this is where 4 staff members would hold a teenage boy by each of their limbs, haul them up and then drop them on the concrete.
Sonia Cooper says many young people were given unmodified electroconvulsive treatment as a punishment. That's without any anaesthetic to dull the pain.
Teenagers again mainly, but this also happened to our vulnerable adult clients, were pulled into the ECT rooms to watch other patients being given ECT, to frighten them, and were told, this is what will happen to you if you don't do what we tell you.
She says many complaints were not dealt with properly, which exposed vulnerable children to further abuse. Ms Cooper says other assaults took a more insidious form under the cover of medical examinations. She gave the example of a doctor nicknamed Dr. Cough.
He would make the boys remove their clothes, he'd line them up and see them individually. He would make them remove their clothes and he would touch their genitals.
Samantha Hill, who's also a partner in Cooper Legal, says it was an ongoing culture of violence coupled with an environment which prohibited narking or snitching. She says that culture included initiation beatings, which occurred at virtually every residence in the country.
We talk a lot about physical and sexual abuse because these are what people understand more about what abuse really means. But psychological abuse and emotional abuse were just as harmful and just as prevalent.
She says children in care were constantly taunted by staff members.
Were told that they were useless, that they'd end up in prison, that they'd never amount to anything, that their parents didn't love them, that nobody wanted them, that they were worthless and nobody cared what happened to them.
The lawyers say it'll take more than legal action to help survivors heal from their past and change the future, with structural long-term change likely to take generations. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
At 6:20, we are going to deal with this issue of sheep placenta cream properly. We're going to dive in deep and find out what it's all about. We're told it's $1 million industry. We're also told it could be a gimmick. Some of you have got in touch and you're very interested in it. One listener is saying that you can remember Mum making me pick up sheep placenta and putting them in containers. This is 30 years ago, and she said they were used for cosmetics. There's also a dispute about whether it really is for skin care or whether it's for stress relief, as reported in one of our reports tonight. And Nita has got in touch and says the cream is worth trying. It'll help her issues with her with natural remedies, and she hasn't found success with anything else. So what does it do? And of course this is on the agenda because the Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha raised it with our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern yesterday in Bangkok. John Peters is the founder and CEO of Nature's Beauty, which sells ovine placenta skincare. He's in Shanghai at the moment for a trade expo. We spoke a little earlier and I started by asking him how his popular product is made.
The placenta extract is made by the sheep, and when they give birth, the actual afterbirth is collected and sterilised and processed in Christchurch. They are MAF approved, licensed and approved processing facility, so it's made there. So that comes in two forms. It comes in liquid or powder, and depending on what you're doing, you would choose which one, and then we give that to we subcontract the manufacturer to New Zealand GMP skincare manufacturers.
Right, okay. Now, as you were, I guess, suggesting before, that there's far more interest in this product overseas than there is nationally here in New Zealand. You're selling it because it's popular, but have you also got good, solid claims in terms of the health or the actual positive impacts that it can make? Is it just that it's popular and people overseas like the idea of it, and New Zealand as being pure and healthy, or have you got some good research that shows this is actually good for you?
Oh no, there'd be very limited research. The only proof I can give is I've been selling this stuff for 20 years, and it's not slowing down. We've had celebrities endorse this type of product. I know Simon Cowell and Victoria Beckham, they came across this in 2012. So it is out there in the Western world, but if you want cold, hard research, I don't have that. I know the Swiss will probably have... The Swiss were the first ones to come out with the placenta, and they found a use for it. I haven't delved into into that area so much. We're driven purely by orders.
Why sheep? We know that there's other products made by placenta. Are there other animals out there, or you sort of zero in on sheep just because it's more available?
No. Well, sheep's iconic to New Zealand, but not only that. Apparently, the sheep placenta and the human placenta are closely. There's some sort of similarity between the two. So, but for the Asian people, the sheep is a highly prized animal, and their culture is very. We might see it only as a food item, but they see it as having a lot of cultural use. All the parts of the sheep is generally used.
Righto. And so any other animals' placentas that you use in your products, or you just stick to sheep?
Oh, no, there's just sheep. I've heard there's some unusual ones. There was horse placenta being touted there for a while, but I thought I'd better leave that one alone.
Didn't last.
No, some of them don't.
So who's buying this product from you? You said Asian countries. Which ones in particular are the big buyers?
Well, the biggest buyers with everything is the Chinese, but the ones that have been buying this for the longest period of time are the Southeast Asians. So the Thai people in particular, they love the placenta, especially if you mix it with gold. That's gold flakes. So we have a cosmetic flake, which is a gold colour, and they like that mixed with the placenta. So
right. So you're talking about gold flaked sheep placenta cream.
Yeah, we call it gold serum. So that's they haven't lost the thirst for that. We've been selling that for a very long time, and it just seems to resonate with them. So when they rub it on their skin, it gives a moisturising benefit. But in a certain light, you can see the skin sort of glow.
Right. Sounds like a bit of a gimmick.
Oh, probably is a gimmick. Yeah, it's more. I would call it a fashion statement, but you could call it a gimmick.
What's this worth to our economy, John?
Wow, I'm only a small player in the whole thing. It would be a lot, but I wouldn't even. It'd be in the millions of dollars.
John Peters there in Shanghai. I asked him who else was selling it, and he didn't want to reveal who his competitors were. Sheep placenta cream. The Dermatological Society says there's no scientific proof of any health benefits. At 26 minutes past 6, a penguin playboy has been ruffling some feathers during a strong breeding season for Wellington's little blue penguins. The Matthew Soames predator-free island in Wellington Harbour is home to about 400 nesting pairs of cheeky korora. And as reporter Charlotte Cook and cameraman Dom Thomas found out, not all the penguins are behaving themselves.
Nesting season is well underway on Matthew Soames Island, and it's keeping Wellington's notorious sushi penguins out of trouble. But another korora has made a name for himself, sticking his beak where he doesn't belong. Named Dexter, this little blue has been labelled the island's resident playboy. Penguin expert Mike Rumble says 2 weeks ago volunteers found Dexter on the island outside a blood-covered nest and suffering a head wound. He'd got into trouble after sticking his beak into another penguin's business. But after some rehab, he returned to his nest and cuddled up to his lady penguin and egg. Turns out the world's smallest penguins definitely have big hearts.
But shortly after that, we came over on Saturday to find Dexter, as he's been called by Wild Base, in another box, covered in blood again. So he has become a real problem.
He has again been taken away for rehabilitation, only after a little bit of a telling off.
Everyone was going, tut, Dexter, don't do that.
Has he been poking his head in other people's nests, do we think?
Yes, he has, because the one he was found in is only a matter of about 2 metres the other side of a massive bush. So it's very close, and it had 2 chicks in it which were not his.
Mr. Rumble says Dexter's behaviour has caused other penguins to attack him, so they're taking him off the island for his own safety. He says apart from the playboy, everyone else has been well behaved, getting down to business with 75% of the 230 eggs already hatched.
What we've been looking at here this morning is the different sizes of chicks. We've got the parent, because it's a brand new egg underneath the parent, beautiful white egg. That says it's only within the last 2 or 3 days that it was laid. We've then gone and looked at different sizes of chicks, from tiny little chicks which are born maybe 5, 6, 7 days ago and are still partially underneath the parent, others which are still quite small We would class them as small penguins, but they're no longer under the parent because they get too big. And then, of course, we've gone to the medium size. We looked at those as well very briefly. And lastly, the big ones. 2 very large chicks, which have what we call 100% down. They're covered entirely in down. Their flippers are still forming, so they're nowhere near the stage of what we call fledging.
The Department of Conservation's Brent Tandy says nationwide the little blue penguins are in decline, but the great nesting results are reassuring for the region.
Considering we're in such an urban environment, we've got quite a healthy population in Wellington Harbour and on the south coast, and I think that's in part, well, probably mainly due to the fact that Machi Somes is a predator-free island, it creates a stronghold here for birds.
Mr Tandy says the small birds with big personalities deserve to be in the running for the contentious Bird of the Year.
Well, the forest birds always get a good go, so I think penguins would be a fantastic choice this year. They're a very charismatic, beautiful little thing, and I think they're well worth a vote.
Mike Rumble says with personalities like the Playboy or the vagrant sushi penguins, they've got the win by a country mile. In Wellington for Checkpoint, or should I say Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
And with that pun, that's us for the evening. See you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A jury in Dunedin has heard claims a former doctor killed a 16-year-old girl to stop her coming forward with allegations of inappropriate behaviour. The Prime Minister has hailed the new trade deal with China as a breakthrough. The trial of the man accused of murdering British backpacker Grace Millane began today, and McDonald's has dismissed its chief executive Steve Easterbrook after he had a relationship with an employee. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
This woke culture where it's a kind of a new Puritanism or Wowserism.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
Funnily enough, he hasn't told his mother he's a rapper, so he has this album out and his parents don't know.